right, I can see we're live in the corner of the screen, left-hand screen. So I'm taking that as my cue. Hello, everyone. I am the CEO and co-founder of Code First Girls. Welcome to today's webinar, and we're talking about Labour government changes for employers. Very, very hot topic at the moment. And I have two wonderful guests with me today. So, Karen, should we start with you with an introduction?
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, so my name's Karen. I'm the co-CEO at Tech Talent Charter, and we're an organisation that looks to drive diversity and inclusion across the tech ecosystem. And I kind of focus on how that intersects with skills development as well across the tech ecosystem.
Thank you very much, Karen. And Lee.
Thanks, Anna. Yes, my name's Lee Findell. I'm a partner and head of corporate at WA Communications. We're a strategic communications agency. We sort of operate at that kind of nexus of policy, regulation, and reputation. So we work with clients on helping them navigate through those situations. In particular, I lead on all our education work. So I've got quite a deep experience of working on education right across the field, but most specifically, actually, my real specialism is in the kind of skills and sort of HEFE space as well. So hopefully I'll be able to provide some insight on what's happening and why over the next hour.
Wonderful. So why are we here today? So we're here to share what we know so far about the new employer regulations, particularly regarding Skills England, the Growth and Skills Levy, and also the Equality Bill and Employment Rights Bill. We have asked for questions beforehand. If you do have any additional questions, the team are going to be sharing an email address with you. Please feel free to send those questions over to the team via email, which will be shared at the end of the session. All right, so let's kick off with, I think, one of the hottest topics right now, the Skills England Bill and the Growth and Skills Levy. Karen, if I can start with you, can you tell us what we know so far about the Growth and Skills Levy?
Yeah, absolutely. So the government announced the transformation of the existing apprenticeship levy into the more flexible growth and skills levy. So this change will enable businesses to allocate up to 50% of their levy contributions towards a wider range of training options beyond those traditional apprenticeships. And Skills England will play a key role in determining which training programmes will qualify for that funding. And it appears at this stage that the apprenticeship service is likely to stay, but it will be adapted to include wider courses over time. It's key to say, though, that this is an emerging picture around exactly what or any of this is going to look like. But at this early stage, that's what we know so far.
And Karen, can we talk about some of the key differences between this and the existing apprenticeship levy? Because they're the majority of questions that I'm getting at the moment from clients, right? Like, what do we know so far about what the key differences are actually going to be?
I mean, the big key difference is this is going to broaden the types of skills provision and offer a flexibility to employers that they will be able to fund using the levy funding. So that is the biggest significant change between the two of them, and it's promising to offer a more responsive take to industry needs and to regional needs, to look to see actually, are we seeing some cohesion across what skills are needed regionally, and looking at how we then develop them nationally as well. It is likely that it will be a repurposing of the existing levy fund rather than looking to necessarily increase levy funding or to release treasury funding. But that is still something that we need definition around. But I would be very surprised if we saw that there would be an increased ask in terms of the amount of contributions, considering we know that there's an unspent amount at the end of each cycle. And I would equally be surprised if we see a release of any of those previous funds from Treasury. I imagine that money has been spent. So we expect that will just be a restructuring and repurposing of the existing fund. And we have to sort of take our kind of greatest insight from the manifesto that suggested that there will be this greater flexibility and less rigid rules. And I think when we look at the difference in terms of the sorts of skills provision that will be included, I think that flexibility is going to be really important. So where some of the traditional apprenticeships have had some criticism around minimum terms and the structure that they need to be delivered in, this will open up actually other skills provision that are fit in a better way to what employers need to make sure that they're skilling and offering those lifelong learning opportunities for their employees, and really getting to the crux of where people need that sort of upskilling, reskilling opportunities to mean they can really maximise their career trajectory. So there's some of the key differences.
Karen, we often hear about some of the kind of rigidity around the existing levy, and obviously the kind of regulation for it has been in place like this for some time. This sounds like potentially opening the door to greater levels of innovation and choice for employers, even though we don't know exact details around it yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited for this. I think this is the reinvigoration that we need in this space to really make sure that we're meeting the needs. Especially when we think about tech and how we make sure that we are keeping up, we are really growing those skills to ensure that we can maximize innovation, that we can offer that equitable skills development. We need to look at the vehicles we're using to deliver those skills. And there is definitely a place for apprenticeships, and all of the indications is that apprenticeships will still be a big part of the skills landscape. But I think there will be an effort to look at how we sort of reconfirm the importance of apprenticeships. But what we'll also have this opportunity is to really look at the flexibility offered by other skills programs and why that is so valuable to both the employees and the employers on that journey, to make sure that we've got the right fit as we have these different skills challenges when we're looking at the number of individuals we need to have in our kind of technical workforce.
Lee, we were talking yesterday. This has been sort of the first big shake-up we've seen in years. Just contextualise this for me. Are you excited about this? I mean, I'm excited about the changes that are coming through. Is this going to open further innovation, do you think?
No, I think so. I think it will. I think there's I think you've got to remember where this sort of come from. I mean, you've almost certainly heard this as probably when Keir Starmer got up in front of 10 Downing Street on his, in his introductory remarks, is that everything's about economic growth. So everything is dependent. The Labour government is utterly dependent on securing economic growth. So if people's living standards are going to improve, if they're going to be able to spend money on public services, it's only going to be done through economic growth. So they see skills, particularly reskilling and upskilling, and sort of reigniting that love of lifelong learning as sort of critical to driving up productivity and therefore economic growth. So that's the central point in their head. So, and if you think about the reason they went for things such as trying to reform the apprenticeship levies, because they were being told by employers that it wasn't working properly for them. So they're responding to that. They're trying to respond to what employers have been telling them around skills and around apprenticeships and what is needed and where it's needed. So if you think about how they've structured government, they've done it on the basis like this mission-led. They called it mission-led governance. There are 5 missions they've got. Now the opportunities mission, which is the one around education, is where most of the kind of skills stuff sits. But I think the important thing about skills is that it sits across different missions. So, and most specifically, it sits directly in the economic growth mission, which again, I've already said is the #1 mission. And actually, if you look at some of the kind of key things they've said, is that, and I quote, giving working people the skills and opportunities to get on is a critical thing of what they're trying to do. So if you take that as the kind of base, as the kind of starting point for everything they're trying to do. You can see why they're trying to do what they're trying to do. So, so they look at the skills system. They go, it's a bit of a mess. It's a bit confusing. What's going on? No one really knows where things are. There's something going on over here. There's something going on over there. There's not really much coordination. You get problems between departments. So, if you're in, I don't know, if you're in DBT, or if you're in DESNES, and you're trying to get information on what the skills gaps is for your particular workers or particular parts of your sector, you can't get that information at the moment. It's kind of hard to get it out of the DfE. So the idea was to set up Skills England to kind of address some of these issues. It becomes kind of sort of cross-departmental to a certain extent, where the departments can dip into it. It becomes kind of a data hub, a data center to hold all these information. And it's linked to some of the kind of key things they're trying to do, again, economically. One is the idea of the industrial strategy, which is under sort of Johnny Reynolds, so it's not even within the DfE. And the other one is the kind of migration strategy, which sits in the Home Office, so it sits with Yvette Cooper. So you've got 3 cabinet ministers directly involved in this, and that's before you bring in Rachel Reeves, as the woman with the purse strings. So you can see why they need this expansiveness and why they've approached it in that particular way. And it's to the point that Karen said earlier, the idea is that it's going to try and do 2 things. First, it'll basically be the gatekeeper of the Growth and Skills Levy, and in terms of sort of maintaining that list of accredited non-apprenticeship courses and where businesses on what they can spend the money on, but also fundamentally it's trying to basically say, okay, so if you with an LSIP over here, or a local authority over here, or a regional combined authority over there, you're trying to do this for your region, your local authority, we've got a better understanding of what that means when you start to stitch it all together. So they're basically trying to stop excessive duplication. Now that's really important in tech, because obviously you're going to find that pretty much every local authority or every kind of combined authority wants to do tech stuff. So the idea of being able to kind of lift up and say, actually, that's a national priority, that's a national framework issue, and using that to support local authorities, or to support the LSIPs, and support the combined mayoral authorities on delivering that is going to be really important.
I think we talked yesterday, Lee, about there's some real heavy hitters in Labour that are behind this. Like, who do you perceive to be the key stakeholders involved in the reform of this?
Is I think it's one of those interesting things, and as we said, there was a great belief that before, when Labour were in opposition and kind of heading, it looked like they were heading towards government. One of the big questions is whether they take skills out of the DfE. They'd say, right, actually, it doesn't really live there, and with the expectation that it might end up in Johnny Reynolds' brief in Department of Business. They haven't done that, and I think. And actually there were sort of 2 reasons for thinking about that. Firstly, the idea of, as I always talked about, of skills being woven into the economic growth strategy, it might be better to live somewhere else. And secondly, was honestly, the education brief is so sprawling, and there are burning platforms everywhere, literally everywhere. And there is absolutely no doubt that Bridget Phillipson, as Education Secretary, probably doesn't have the bandwidth to deal with this. She's already said that early years, schools, childcare, they're the things that she's got to deal with first. They're the big priorities for us. So the expectation was they would just lift skills out of the DfE and put it somewhere else. But what they've done is the kind of classic Labour third way. They've come up with a different solution. They brought back one of the genuine heavyweights of the Labour Party, Jackie Smith, former Home Secretary, a real significant figure within the Labour Party. They've made her appear, so getting off the telly, getting off all the podcasts, getting off Strictly Come Dancing, all the other things she was doing. And they basically said to her, run skills for us, run skills, run universities. And she will have enormous amounts of authority in that role, probably more than most sub-cabinet ministers will. So technically, this will sit within the DfE, but in reality, it sits with Jackie Smith, and she will run it cross-departmentally within the kind of structure of the kind of missions-led government stuff. So that's what I would anticipate for that. She is for this area, she is the most significant figure within Labour at the moment, without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, Interesting. And Karen, because I know you've been super close, right, to Department of Education, and things that I hear from clients almost on a daily basis as to potentially some of the reasons as to why this has become a subject for reform. Things like conversion rates. I think the government website tells us on the whole there's around about a 53% conversion rate off the back of apprenticeships, which is essentially completion rates, right, of the actual apprenticeship. I hear from employers frustration around the amount of time that it takes. Like, it has to be a year and a day for it to legally be an apprenticeship. And also how tech skills are constantly changing. The amount of time that's required in that year for training, they want somebody that's effectively ready to go as well. So productivity is coming into it. I just wanted your opinion, Karen, on why you think this might have come to a head. Lee's contextualized it by saying, you know, this is very much about the economy and driving the economy forward. And surely that's got to be about putting people in jobs, right? And getting them the right skills to the right people in a way that can work with employers rather than potentially work against them.
Absolutely. I think when we look at the potential for tech innovation and what that could mean for UK PLC, we're minimising that opportunity because we don't have the right skilled individuals in the right roles progressing at the right rate. And although apprenticeships can be the right fit, in lots of circumstances, actually they are hindering that skills development at the right rate. And so I think when it's absolutely about economic growth, it's making sure that people not only get into jobs, but actually they have that progression, there's that retention of that talent. And that's where actually when we look at the sort of tech space at the moment, we have more of a challenge, actually that retention of talent. And that's often because there isn't a transparent sort of career pathway, because either the opportunity to upskill doesn't seem available, or the kind of the progression pipeline has breaks and blocks. So the more that we can do to unblock that pipeline and make sure that there are skills opportunities at appropriate stages through individual careers, that absolutely makes a difference to retention, which makes a big difference in terms of how we can drive true innovation and economic growth. So these are really key elements that we have to address to make sure that we can speak to the wider ambition of government of that strong economic growth. You know, this happens in our organisations, unlocking these skills, making sure people are staying in employment and progressing and having these really solid career journeys. That is the difference that we need to see in the wider economy.
And Lee, doesn't this go to the heart of why Skills England might actually exist, right? In the sense that if we look at the reality of the situation now, I've read numerous articles over the years saying that the lion's share of levy funding is actually going on things like leadership and management training for existing employees. Is this a chance for us to put a line in the sand and say, maybe that's not what it was intended to do, and let's get Skills England to actually map out the skills we're going to need to drive the economy forward?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely. I think you've got the nail on the head there. I think that a lot of the criticism from Labour, and some like quite senior Labour figures. So we're talking, people who have been, former ministers and things like that, and who have done a lot of thinking about this. A lot of their criticism of the apprenticeship was not its existence, but the way that it was being used by employers in terms of who it was going to. So they were like, why do we need to fund all these MBAs? I mean, for God's sake, we should be trying to we need this to get people from level 2, level 3 up, and to reskill it within. So the intention was to basically try and change the dynamics around that. I mean, and the stats aren't really good. I mean, I know Karen's already touched on this. Only 4% of employers use their full apprenticeship levy funding. Average spend's about 55%. 3.5 billion of the funding allocation expired between 2017 and 2022. I mean, that's just, the figures are just extraordinary, really. And I think that when you see that very starkly, you can see why everyone supports some kind of change to it. Obviously, we're not, what that change exactly looks like is going to be interesting over the next few months. But I think that what we will see is that that idea of, if they can create some flexibility, but it's not about total flexibility. I think that it's the important thing here to say is that the things they're most worried about are making sure the money's spent properly, but it's actually spent on genuine skills that will work for work, that work for learners and work for workers in the right way, and actually does the thing of driving skills and driving reskilling within the country. So what they don't want is, frankly, employers to basically say, oh, well, an FCO going, oh, I'll take that money, thank you very much, and I'll use it to fund, everyone's training program on the new Excel system, whatever it may be, kind of thing. It's the idea of stopping that sort of stuff happening as well. And as you say, the other side of things, which is, let's not have, not basically finding ways of basically trying to restrict that use of the levy to pay for things that actually an employer would pay for anyway. It's actually for things that they wouldn't necessarily pay for. It's about giving those opportunities or driving that kind of growth. So it's about, that's why there's going to be a consultation over the autumn. That's why it's going to be really important when people come back on it. One of the interesting things before the election, which we're very kind of conscious of, through clients and contacts at the Labour Party, was that they were trying to get an open letter signed off, in the run up to the election campaign, which was basically get a massive commitment from employers, from skills providers, from training providers, from all the organisations to say, this is a great idea, let's replace the apprenticeship levy with growth skills levy. And the response from people was, yeah, we kind of agree with that, but what does that look like? What does that change look like? What do you mean by flexibility? And are we going to agree with that if we do it? And I think that's the devil is in the question there. And that's why the next few months are really important, in terms of being able to engage in that consultation, where you kind of get it to go to, so the employers can get it to where they want to get it to, and training providers can get it to where they wanted to get it to, in terms of ensuring that the right skills are being catered for with the right flexibility, the right levels of innovation being able to be driven through that consistently, without it getting tied up in bureaucracy or all the other things that kind of end up slowing down that need for flexibility and innovation. That is the only way this is going to drive this sector forward.
I mean, Lee, that's a jaw-dropping amount of money that you just said in terms of unspent.
Guessing
just was, goes into the treasury, right?
Yeah.
Maybe there was not enough of an incentive to change it for a while. I'm sorry, Karen, you were going to come in there.
Oh, no, I couldn't agree more. I think that it's a jaw-dropping amount. I think the other thing to just add to what Lee was saying is, we want to maintain high quality of the training provision, and that's where the flexibility, we've got to really keep this balance. Having high quality flexible training is the kind of gold standard, and we must ensure that we keep that good standard. Otherwise, what we do is a disservice to the people we put through those programs, but we unpick a significant part of why organisations need to have their staff going through these journeys, or in terms of how they're onboarding. So I think for me, it's a key focus of how do we make sure that we're maintaining a really high standard in terms of the quality of the provision as we go through this consultation as well.
I think as well, Karen, is like my sympathy with employers, just because I think how difficult sometimes it has been to actually implement the levy, which I think is probably part of the problem, is that, utmost sympathy just listening to them, trying to implement it. There's an administrative burden, which is quite significant. I think in easing some of these things, are we actually just making it easier and, giving employers essentially more choice to be able to use it in the way that they think is the right way to use it?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. There needs to be this balance that it's a fit for purpose. So it doesn't necessarily need to be that it's a wide open channel that is so easy that there needs to be a level of diligence, But what we need to create is that where you see a skills gap, when you see an opportunity to, that's to bring people in or to upskill, that you can be reactive to that and access at the right time something that's fit for purpose for your circumstance and for your employees. That this is widening the pool of opportunity, because there'll be different skills provision that may now be more suitable to the circumstance that an employee or an employer finds themselves in. And so I think for me, that's the key bit. The burden of all the administrative burden, the time burden, is stopping us getting to the crux of what matters. People identifying the skills that they need, being really clear around the expectations of how we develop those equitably in our organisations, and then being able to engage with providers in a way that's really fit for purpose, and that drives that change now, so that we can build a better, more resilient workforce, and we see that economic advantage. So I think that for me is that we have something that feels much more fit for purpose. It doesn't need to necessarily be an open door. There needs to be that diligence, but there needs to be an easier push on that door than there is at the moment, where it feels a bit like pushing a boulder up the hill.
I agree. And Lee, I think one of those kind of administrative consequences that I've seen play out in organisations is that actually the apprenticeship levy is being used for learning and development budgets now, in that it's being used actively to, upskill, reskill existing employees. Do we need to have a more honest conversation? I hope this consultation will bring it out, that actually, the majority of levy spending is being used with employees at the moment, as opposed to the traditional image, right, of bringing in potentially, say, a 19-year-old that didn't want to go to university. I mean, do you see what I mean? Is this sort of administrative reality of this? Do we have to be a bit more honest? And that's how it's playing out. And I think the consultation might address some of these issues.
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's, again, going back to, we hosted a roundtable, on a very kind of a big education roundtable months before the election. We had Jim Knight on. Jim Knight was former schools minister, done a lot of thinking around Ofsted and things like that. And he kept on, and the thing he kept on talking about was the thing we're failing on is that idea of how we get school leavers into work. Particularly the ones who don't go to university in particular. Sort of, what do we do about that? How do we deal with that kind of the level 2 to level 3 problem that exists within and beyond within the workplace and things like that? And if you look at some of the stuff that sits behind and the thinking on the opportunities mission, again, it's these things about sort of how do we get people work ready? What do we do? How do you address this problem? And also, there was I think there was a long read in the FT yesterday talking about the availability of apprenticeships to the actual amount of people who actually want to do them, 18 and 19-year-olds. So this cannot not be part of the conversation. Because it's screaming at it that this is, this bit needs to be addressed properly, because we have the opportunities to do an apprenticeship once you come off your BTEC or your A levels or your level 3s, or even before that, or even at that level. Are just not where they should be, and actually, as more and more young people look to that as an alternative to going to university, those options aren't there as they should be. And actually, if we're not using the levy at least some way in helping to address that, and we're not using it properly, really, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be upskilling, reskilling, because that's important as well. Because then, particularly as we kind of, particularly as jobs move, AI and tech and all these kind of things start to drive change in those. It's important that happens, but it can't be at the disadvantage of addressing that direct thing of what an apprenticeship is there for originally.
Karen, my sense of sort of maybe some consequences for employers of this is that they're not going to be throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? There is sort of 50% that will remain as is. With the employers watching today, in terms of consequences for them, it's that other 50% that's interesting, right? That we're saying that's what offers the choice and innovation. Don't worry if you're absolutely doing amazingly well at apprenticeships, that's fantastic. That's not necessarily going to change. But what's going to change is this other 50% which offers that choice and innovation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No one should be fearful that, oh gosh, we're going to lose what we've built. And this, you know, for so many organisations, they put so much effort into really being sophisticated in how they're applying this, how it's supporting their needs. So it's really important that, you know, there isn't going to be this shock change. This is good news in terms of we're looking at a broader context of what could be possible. And so in the short term, you know, nothing really will change on the ground. There'll be and in the longer term, it will be this increase in the available options. And what we're really, you know, although we do believe that Skills England will move quite quickly on this, those with some early estimates saying that the levy flexibilities will be in place from September 2025. I think that may be a bit ambitious. I think it certainly, as you look ahead for the next year, you can feel quite secure that there's unlikely to be any sort of significant change. Obviously, there'll be the opportunity to be part of the consultations, but we're certainly looking to further ahead in terms of where there'll be the opportunity for these flexibilities. And you know, I think it's a good moment to take stock of what has been successful in terms of your skills mission, and you know what actually is desirable if you could make those requests from the flexibilities that will hopefully be available.
It's funny, so we at Codefest Girls, with some clients, we're already having conversations about what 2026 is going to look like for them. So yeah, I agree with you that the sort of, it's not going to be immediate change, but I think certainly maybe towards the latter end of 25 and into 26, this is going to have to be something employers think about. Lee talked yesterday in detail about what we think the timeline is going to look like. Could you outline that for some of the viewers?
Yeah. So this is what we think. So if I know, you know, it's always what we think rather than anything else. Well, this has, you know, don't get me wrong, this has been informed by conversations with DfE and conversations with, so there's an element of kind of some thinking behind it, what is it? So it's not complete guesswork. So look, okay. So here's the things we do absolutely know, right? So they've paused and reviewed the level 3 defunding. So, you know, there was a BTEC one, and they've said that consultation that will run till the end of the year, when they will decide what they're going to do on that going forward. So that's in motion. Yesterday, they started advertising for the permanent board members for Skills England. So if you want to apply, 27th of September is the deadline. So get your applications in if you fancy being on the Skills England board. So the train is rolling, right? So we're out. It's out the station now. We're off down the track. With thinking of those in terms of how that time frame will work out, they've got to get through this level 3 review before they put the Skills England bill into place, because it doesn't work without, unless they've decided what they're going to do with that, the Skills England stuff isn't going to start working properly. But they can start the consultation on the growth of skills levy, which I think will start. We're saying autumn. If they've said autumn, which could mean anything from next month through to November, frankly, sort of thing. You know, you never really can tell with that sort of thing. But the anticipation would be that would run into the early part of next year, as the Skills England bill is starting to kick into gear as well. So, but all in all, you'd anticipate the consultation starting in October, running through, the bill starting in the House of Lords. That's the important thing. Bill starting in the House of Lords. Well, as Jackie Smith is going to be authoring it, then you anticipate still in House of Lords. That's really important, because that's where all the expertise lives. Parliamentary expertise on skills is quite vast, but it's all in the House of Lords. So there are a couple of good people in the Commons, but you know, that's not where the expertise lives. So it's good that it starts in Lords. It's good that will be big debate around that. So, and that also gives a good opportunity for people to be part of that debate, because you know, the opportunity to kind of engage in a kind of a full discussion within the House of Lords is a good way of starting a piece of legislation, because it isn't as rigid in terms of party lines on it. But we expect all of that, and including going to Royal Assent for Skills England, which will include all the growth and skills levy stuff, to be by June next year. So that in turn means that, to Karen's original point, you're looking at earlier September 25 before the kind of flexibility stuff starts to kick in. But that's all based on the understanding of where things are at the moment. And it's still quite a lot to get through in a fairly short space of time, actually.
Yeah, no, I agree. Especially if they want royal assent on it around June time. But also, I think, quite exciting, potentially for a lot of employers watching. Talking of which, Karen, how can employers actually get involved? I mean, I know things are changing on a daily basis, right? Sometimes we're getting updates or changes on a daily basis, but if there's employers watching thinking, how can I get involved in this? Or what's your advice?
Yeah, absolutely. So there will be a public consultation, and so there is an opportunity to directly share your insight. And I think if you're one of the kind of larger employers, that this is a big part of how you operate, it would be sensible to make sure that your voice is considered in the development of these ideas. So I think that being part of the public consultation is really important. Making sure that you're staying close to your skills providers as well, in terms of understanding what their plans are, how they're interacting with the consultation, so that you can feed in some of your opinions through those discussions. And I think one of the key things is really looking at what is desirable for you as an organisation, and so that when you want to express that, you have the clarity of what you're really looking for and what's working, what's not working, in terms of being part of those discussions. But at the moment, it is a little unclear of who is going to be consulted in terms of sort of trade organisations and other more formal groups and coalitions, and how that public consultation and the opportunity to contribute, what that will really look like. So that's still a bit of a watching brief to see how that will land out.
Lee, this is the golden question, right? Who's going to get a seat at the table? And we don't know yet, do we?
No, I know, and I don't think we do. But I think what I would say is that there are kind of key big organisations that are seen as representative bodies, whether that's the Association of Colleges, whether it's AALP, whether it's it's with some of the kind of those big groups, and some of the big trade, or so obviously CBI, and they will be asked. And therefore, so if you're already in those, if you're already part of those membership organisations, do both things. So Karen's point, basically, yes, engage as a particularly businesses will be listened to in this. Particularly, you're talking sense in terms of what's needed and why. But don't be scared about pushing through your own representative bodies as well, because they are the ones who will basically find themselves in the kind of stakeholder meetings and things like that. It's interesting that. There was when Bridget Phillipson came in, she did a big thing about making sure she engaged with all stakeholders. So, when she said to her, "You've got to engage. We've got to, officials, we've got to engage." She did a big webinar within the first kind of week or so. Something like that. It's like 1,000 people signed into this webinar to listen to what she had to say. And she's very keen on that. And to a certain extent, that's true. But they're basically inundated. I mean, it's like they're overwhelmed, first of all, with how much they've got to do, but also with how many kind of organizations want to engage on this or interested in their various bits and things like that. So there's an element of them trying to sift their way through that and trying to kind of work out how to do and what best to do and who are the best voices to listen to in that sort of thing. So, but there are, the bottom line is that the reason they're going back to the reason they're doing it is because employers told them it needed to be done. Yeah. So don't be scared about putting your voice forward, because this is the reason they're doing it in the first place. So this is an important thing to know, that this is not this has not been magicked up by a think tank in a dusty room somewhere. This has come directly from engagement with employer groups originally.
And I think, Karen, I was going to say, one of the things about Code First Girls that was always important to me when this was created, and the reason we've got to the scale that we've got to, is that we are so employer-led. Like, for me, it's absolutely at the very heart of what we do. We're working really hard at the moment, Code First Girls, to get that seat around the table, to make sure that we're informed about the changes. But equally, I'd invite anybody watching this, or the employers watching, if we said, you can wave a magic wand tomorrow in an ideal world, how would you actually spend that levy funding? Tell us. Let us be able to put those opinions forward. In an ideal world, Lee, we were talking about the type of data sets that Code First Girls have that are actually useful to ministers. these are the types of things that Code First Girls are putting together right now to say, listen, these are our data sets. These are the employees we work with. These are the women we represent. You know, they're important in your decision making. So yeah, I'd invite any employer watching to please let us know what your views are. We might have our own mini consultation. I don't want to make it even more complicated, but I certainly think those views are really, really important in getting that seat at the table. I don't know, Lee or Karen, if you have any comments on that or views on it.
No, I completely agree. There's something about, I always say this, is when you engage with ministers, engage with officials, data-led is really important, you know, in terms of what you're trying to tell them is, because this information they don't have, you've got to give them information they don't have. You've got to give them kind of facts they don't have, they've not got access to. That's the only way they can start making informed decisions. Mm-hmm. So I always say that is basically go with solutions to things, basically say, we think this is probably the best way forward on this, and this is what the data is telling us, and this is the success rate of doing this, and this is the impact of doing all this, and that kind of really drives heavily. Also, know, particularly in this space, in the tech space, is absolutely guaranteed that, you know, flexibility on modular courses around digital skills and things like that is going to be absolutely there. No doubt about it. Absolutely no doubt about it, because it is seen as that and green skills are seen as the two key things that are going to drive economic growth. So there's absolutely no doubt about that this set stuff will be in there. But what does that look like? What does innovation look like? How do you stay ahead of the curve? Those are the important things that they're going to want to know. And the data that shows that is going to be really important.
And I think those mini consultations offer something that allows organisations to actually consider what they're asked, that shared language, because I think, as Lee said, you know, we have to come with some of the solutions. We have to come with a clarity in what our asks are as you know, as an industry, as employers, and, you know, having that opportunity to kind of workshop some of those ideas together and create some of that shared language in terms of, okay, what have we valued from being part of the Code First Girls programs? Where can we see that actually with the levy funding that would accelerate the access to develop more? I think that's so important in terms of coming actually, rather than just like, yes, this has been good, you know, like this has been good, and because it's actually, well, this is the data we know, this is the experience, and this is what we can do with it. You know, absolutely accelerating what the opportunities are with these flexibilities. And I think that's where having some of those opportunities to speak together before being part of the formal consultation could be a great advantage, so that we can offer the biggest impact in these conversations.
Okay, all right, watch this space. Clients watching, we will probably be inviting you to Next Step shortly if you're interested. I'm going to move on now. I know that was a large topic, beast of a topic. We're going to talk about the Equality Bill and the Employment Rights Bill. So the Labour government have also announced their Equality Bill and the Employment Rights Bill, and it's aimed at addressing discrimination, promoting equality, and enhancing workers' rights. These bills have had significant implications for employers, as they are introducing new requirements and expectations in the workplace. Karen, what do we know so far about the new Equality Bill and its potential impact on employers?
So what we've been told is that there'll be legislation on race equality that will be published in draft to enshrine the full right to equal pay in law. And the briefing note made it clear that the government intends to tackle that inequality for ethnic minorities and disabled people by introducing a statutory right for equal pay for ethnic minorities and disabled people, and introducing mandatory ethnicity and disability pay gap reporting for large employers that have more than 250 employees. This is really exciting news in terms of the big step change that we're kind of approaching with this. This isn't the first time that ethnicity pay gap reporting has been proposed. With the previous Conservative government, they held a consultation in about 2019, and at the time the government decided not to make ethnicity pay gap reporting mandatory, acknowledging that there are difficulties that come with confidentiality, the complexities in obtaining the data, and potentially feeling that there was burden to business. But these are all issues which Labour will need to consider as they're sort of taking through the consultation. But the bill being described as a draft bill suggests that there may be that kind of wider consultation to address some of those challenges. So before it's put before Parliament. But this is we have to look at the levers that we have available to really drive this change, and these are two massive ones to make sure that there's focus on how we're supporting ethnic minorities and disabled people through their career journeys. One of the things I would love to see is also looking at the employment gap. It's one thing to sort of recognise the pay gap, but if people are not even getting into employment in these organisations, then there's a bigger problem. And I think especially when we're looking at disability, that is a real challenge, that we're not engaging with enough disabled people and bring them into our workforces. So that pay gap will tell us some of the story, but not enough of the story. So I'm excited that this is a good move, and it will mean big changes if you are of a size of over 250 employees in terms of that mandatory reporting. And I think that is going to need a real focus on almost immediately on how you're going to drive disclosure rates within your organisation, because without having that insight, where we've been able with gender pay gap to fall on HR data, we need the self identification of this data. And if you don't have that good level of disclosure, you're going to really come up against it, because what you're able to present in those in that reporting will just not be reliable, but also paint perhaps quite a challenging picture for you as an organisation. So this is something that I would say you absolutely need to put your attention to as soon as possible, because driving those disclosure conversations don't happen overnight. You need to make use of the time that we have available now.
I mean, Karen, I always say that Code First Girls is as much about intersectionality as anything else, right? Making sure that we really, really hit different levels of diversity is really, really important to us. But if we even look at something like neurodiversity, like within the Code First Girls community, right, it is self-disclosure, so individuals disclosing. And what's really interesting is right now we report on that self-disclosure at around about 19%, but we actually suspect it's probably closer to 40%. So just in the Code First Girls community alone, we have a delta, right, between the two. And I think the big question here is, how do we encourage disclosure, and how do you build a culture of trust as an employer to make sure you're getting that data and feeding it back to the government?
This is a wide-scale challenge that we have. We did research last year looking at asking tech employers how many neurodivergent individuals do they have in their organisation, and it was reported that there was 3% of technologists were neurodivergent, and we were like, okay, not what we were expecting. So we asked technologists directly, and it was 53%. And this absolutely illustrates that there is this massive challenge with people feeling that they can disclose this information about themselves to their employer. Now, this does fall back to, if you don't have an inclusive culture, it is very difficult to artificially create psychological safety. So this is the deep work. You can't just jump to mandating that your employees tell you, because they will just prefer not to disclose, and you don't get any further forward. If anything, you erode that trust. So it is doing the deep work of looking at how you build those cultures within your teams, how you equip your managers to create those environments. But one of the really key things is to look at the transparency around the collection of that data, being very clear about why you are collecting it, what are you going to do with it, who is going to see it, and making sure that there is that absolute trust. If people are to share that information, where is that going and what is going to happen to it? Because so many people feel that by sharing this information, it may act as a disadvantage, or it will be used against them in that kind of tokenism context and conversation. So being really clear about what is going to happen with that data is really important, and making sure that there is a good level of frequency that you collect this information, especially around disability. Through your life, you can have age-acquired disabilities, other disabilities that can emerge as you go through your life. Having those opportunities to disclose that information is really important, not just in the recruitment process where you're asked these questions. So giving that opportunity and engaging your majority groups to make sure that your disclosure rates are good, putting value to why we're doing this work, why we need to understand the demographic of our employee base so that we can serve our employees better, we can understand how we can meet their needs. So building that trust there isn't a silver bullet. You can't just do it overnight. It is doing the deep work. But if you do that, you will absolutely drive those disclosure rates, and you will have a better, more resilient business as a result, because people will feel that they're able to, to bring more of their self to the work that they do, and that is absolutely to your benefit. But it's got to be focused and make sure that you're really committed to making these changes.
And I think, Karen, as well, I'm just reflecting on what you're saying, and thinking about genuine, authentic engagement with these communities at grassroots level, right? We need that genuine and authentic engagement. This can't just be a tick box activity. And where it is genuine and authentic and you are actually making an impact, that will be seen, and then the culture will be encouraged. But moving away from this kind of tick box fig leaf, to something that is actually tangible, where you're building a culture and you're actually changing things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's paramount that this is authentic, because otherwise it'll drive no change at all.
Another thing I was going to say, Karen, is, reporting is the first step, right? And I feel like we've kind of had this in the first iteration of when we look at like gender pay gap reporting. And I feel like this government's now going to go even further to say, okay, reporting is one thing, but like, what's then the action plan around it, right? So reporting is the first step. Then I think what people are going to start to see is then how you're actually going to change things and put a plan into action, in the same way we're seeing now that kind of doubling down on the gender pay gap as well.
Hey, that's what I hope to see. Just telling people that things aren't good. Well, of course, that doesn't change that things aren't good. You have to have that action plan for change. So, from my point of view, we have to address and not just settle that, plateauing at where we stand is good enough. It's not. We need to see how we can drive those conversations forward. And if we're just in this pure business context, this makes for more resilient business. You will have a economically stronger business if you are driving a more inclusive culture. We know that's true. So if you want to think about do that future scoping of what how do I make sure that my business is in a good position as I look ahead, this is a great place to start and to land and to do the deep work. It will drive that change for you.
And Karen, we like at Code First Girls work with a lot of organisations that have been absolutely intrinsic to looking at the data picture around this. Like the Tech Talent Charter was an example, like Women in Finance Charter that we sit on. And I'm not sure that a lot of employers are aware, but a lot of these organisations were actually seeing regressions in the data, particularly around sort of women in technology, and just sort of making companies aware of just how important that is. I don't think many companies I talk to are aware of the fact that we are seeing some regressions in the data.
Absolutely. We've seen a 6% drop in the number of senior women in tech. So these are the most senior technologists, and we've seen that drop in the last year. we are not just plateauing in this, we are slipping back. So this absolutely needs attention now. So, this, look at your data. You've got to allow the data to tell you the truth. One of the frustrations I have is that data can tell you any story you want to, you can cut it any way you want, but someone in your organization needs to know the truth of what your picture looks like. So make sure, if you're a leader in this space, you're really understanding what is the honest truth about what we're doing, and then you make your decisions on that, whatever direction they pull you in. But you've got to be honest about what happened, where's our trajectory going on this, and not sleepwalk into a bit of a crisis, because that's what we're seeing actually as organizations. And we have these conversations, they go, oh gosh, actually no, we've looked at the data now and we recognize that we've got a problem here, and we've got to do something that makes a change immediately.
Yeah, I'm very much seeing the same thing. And I think in 2025, we don't want to see like a lot of panicked organizations, right? It's like, how do you plan for this now with also the other changes that are coming? We are proactive rather than reactive. That's the last thing we want, is a reactive scenario.
Absolutely.
And if we talk about the Employment Rights Bill very quickly, what do you think the impact is going to be on employers, and how can they prepare for that?
So this is a big selection of recommendations that are coming from government that are likely to become policy. So I know we've only got a short amount of time, but that's going to be a ban on exploitative 0 hours contracts. That's an end on fire and rehire. That will be making parental leave, sick leave, and protection from unfair dismissal a day one right. Making sure that there's a opportunity for flexible working as a day one right, strengthening protections for new mothers, and looking at removing the lower earning limit for SSP. So there's lots of significant changes, and one that I want to make sure is used in the right way is looking at that day one right to unfair dismissal. That is going to really change the recruitment process, the onboarding, because actually, if you are not treating those individuals fairly, they can take tribunal action from immediately. So probation periods, looking at some of the structures that organisations have in place now, won't offer them the same protections as they will in the future. And it also, what I don't want to see though, is that then makes organisations more risk averse, and that then starts to see a pushback on diversity. We know this type of person, we're going to stay safe, we're not going to make sure that we're really being inclusive in our recruitment practice. So I think this it's a bit of a double-edged sword, and we need to make sure that through these consultations, as these policies come through, that there is this rigor in making sure that there isn't any unintended consequences with these really positive reinforcement of employee rights. We've just got to make sure that there's the right balance for these new developments, so that we're doing the bit where it does reinforce the employee's position.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Just on one thing on this, and I think what Karen said is absolutely accurate. I think that again, it comes back to what Labour about. This is quite a very social democratic version of the Labour Party, the sort of thing you wouldn't have seen since like the 1970s in lots of ways. So it's just got a different attitude towards the balance between workers' rights and employer rights and sort of things. So that's why some of these things have been introduced, is to try and what they see is to kind of readdress some of that balance situation. But I think some of the key things to say are it doesn't stop you fairly dismissing someone. The difference between unfair dismissal and fair dismissal. It doesn't stop you fairly dismissal, and the probation period is still going to be important. So I think when you think about, and it's to the point Karen's making in terms of ensuring onboarding is done properly, ensuring that the probation is done properly, and that actually it's actually when you come to the end of the probation, it's just saying, oh yeah, they're fine, kind of thing. Actually doing those sort. I suppose it's about trying to engender good practice as much as anything else. So I think don't feel scared about it, is what I would say. Is if sort of embrace the opportunity to see your good practice be kind of rolled out almost with a legislative kind of support behind it, really. And I think that is, and again, back to my original point about how this government will listen to employers. Yes, they will, but they expect employers to be good employers and expect them to do good practices. So they're the ones they're going to be listening to.
Absolutely.
Amazing. We are now coming to time. Thank you so much for that discussion today, Lee and Karen. Again, if you've got any questions for us, my team are going to be dropping their email in the chat. And yeah, please watch this space for next steps, because I can assure you Code Pascals is going to very much be involved in them. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.